Thanks for coming, folks. You're actually going to see some information tonight that nobody else in Ireland has seen, and I've been working at it into the very early hours of the morning for the last 2 weeks. I have to say, my life went on hold about 18 months ago, thanks to a typical, or not so typical, morning at the market in Bandon, where someone approached me and asked me to have a look into the health aspects of water fluoridation. And I kind of went home. We had just had a baby a few weeks beforehand, and I wasn't getting much sleep anyway, so I said I'd do some reading in the later hours of the morning when my wife was getting rest. And I started reading. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that, from the scientist's point of view, I just ignore because it's not documented properly. It doesn't have proper references. So I went straight to the scientific sources to find out what the story was about water fluoridation. And I thought it would be a quick exercise. I thought, it's been a few hours looking at this, and I'll get back to my friend at the market next Saturday and say, everything's fine, you don't have to worry about it. But I got the shock of my life. I actually got the shock of my life. Now, I'm working as an environmental scientist for 22 years, and I've worked not just in Ireland but abroad, and I've worked in many different fields, but in the last decade my main area has been environmental due diligence and risk assessment. I've done due diligence, risk assessments on contaminated sites and on pharmaceutical sites, and my job is to go in there and make sure that I can identify any potential contaminant that may have harm on humans or the environment, and to make sure that everything's there from a paperwork point of view, that all the due diligence is there, that I'm aware of all the toxicological issues and epidemiological issues that may result from potential exposure to a contaminant from the plants. And when I started the research on this, the first thing I realised was that there was no data on the chemical that we're putting into our water supply. There's no data. We've been adding it to our water supply for 45 years in Ireland, more or less, and the same in the United States of America. And the organisation that has been mandating and legislating for it to be put into the water are the ones that are responsible for it, are the departments of health. So they've been medicating, because it's put into water to treat a disease, which is dental caries. They've been medicating the entire population of Ireland for 45 years with a chemical that has never been tested for human safety. It's never been tested for environmental safety. They don't know what the toxicological profile of the chemical is in terms of its overall health impacts on humanity. Now that's not a very smart thing to do. It's more than not a very smart thing to do. It's a criminal action, as far as I'm concerned, because you should not, under any circumstances, expose a population to risk, unnecessary risk or harm, especially when you're medicating the entire population of the country, as they are in Ireland. And there are some of the very reasons why the likes of Germany stopped water fluoridating in the 1970s. The whole impetus for it came from America, and after the Second World War they introduced it in the Netherlands and Germany, in Sweden and in other countries, and one by one, and in Japan, and one by one in those countries, decades ago, they all stopped. They all stopped because they did a risk assessment on it. And some of them went into exceptional detail in regards to the risk assessment. You had medical physicians, like in the Netherlands, set up teams of clinical doctors and toxicologists and review the public health risks that they were seeing occurring with their patients from exposure to fluoride in drinking water. And their findings were astonishing. And I don't know what they were doing in the Department of Health in Ireland, because why aren't we warned about it? In the Netherlands, they were so alarmed at the data that they found that the Minister for Health resigned in disgrace, and the Dutch Parliament changed the legislation literally overnight to prevent them from ever adding a chemical like this to their drinking water supply ever again. And we're still doing it maybe 35 years later. In Sweden, they went to the Nobel Institute. We've heard of the Nobel Academy, and the Nobel Academy advised the Swedish government to stop fluoridating the water supply for health concerns, and the Swedish government accepted their advice, as you would. The Nobel Institute or very fine institute, and they stopped. The French government, they never started it, but they asked for advice off the Pasteur Institute, and again one of the leading scientific institutes in the world. They likewise said to the French government, you shouldn't do it. It's potentially dangerous for the population, so the French never started it. The Danish government went to their Environmental Protection Agency, and the Environmental Protection Agency said, don't do it, because you don't know what the toxicological profile of the chemical is, and you don't know what the dietary fluoride intake is of the population, and you don't know what the side effects are going to be. So they never started. So today, in 2013, we are the last country in the whole of Europe who is still fluoridating their population with a chemical that has never been tested for human safety, and has been mandated by a political decision for the last 40 years, because it's a legislation enacted in the law. So it's a political decision, and ultimately our politicians take responsibility for it, because they're the ones who brought the legislation in. It's astonishing. Japan stopped in the early 1970s, and have never looked back. China stopped in the 1980s because they found that they have a problem in China anyway, because they have high fluoride levels in some parts of China due to the geology of the area, as they do in parts of Africa as well, and also in Argentina and Mexico and countries like that. The Chinese found that it was reducing the IQ of their children. So it was acting as a neurological toxin. So they stopped. And that was in 1983, 20 years ago. And 30 years ago. No, 20 years ago. 20 years ago. 30 years ago. Still we're doing it now. And this was all news to me. I mean, I really, when the debate came up about fluoridation in Ireland, it was really around 1999, and I missed that boat entirely, and I was trying to figure out how did I not become aware of it, and it was because my best friend died in a car crash, and that was the last thing I was thinking about. I was kind of consumed by grief at the time, and I wasn't really reading newspapers, and never saw the debate. And the next time it happened was in 2003, where there was a review, an independent review set up. It wasn't independent at all, but a review was set up. Micheál Martin was involved in it. He set up an expert group of dentists to look at the human health impacts of ingesting the toxin, and they, of course, ignored a lot of the evidence that was presented by international experts from Canada and the United States. That was buried by all accounts. It's on the Senate records, you can read it if you dare to look for it. But I missed that one as well, because my own mother, Lord rest her, she died from colon cancer in 2003. So I didn't see that debate either. And really, my awakening to the whole subject only happened because of Joe. Joe, can you put up your hand? Do you hear? It's your fault. About 18 months ago, and it has been some ride. I mean, like I said, I've actually more or less I've not taken on new work. I've retained one or two clients, but I've literally worked on this full time I know what my output is, and some people have said what I've done in a year. A professor said it to me in the United States when he sent a circular out to 30,000 people around the world there on Christmas. He said, what I've managed to achieve in 18 months astonishes him, because some people could spend 20 years trying to read and absorb the information that I've done, both in my report and follow-on reports, and they're all ignored in Ireland.
Do you know why?
So
do you know why?
I cannot figure out why. I have questioned that myself numerous times. I mean, my week over the last number of years has been about getting information from a network of people and finding it myself around the world. Medical doctors, professors of dentistry, toxicologists, and ordinary citizens who are informed on the subject, who we have a group who are sending information to each other now, and I would update our political establishment in Ireland literally on a weekly basis. I would send them an email with the latest scientific finding on fluoride, the latest study, and a short synopsis of what it is. So I've been sending that to 820 councillors and all of the senators and all of the TDs and all of the cabinet, all of the newspapers, and it's just this big black hole of void of silence that it seems to be going into. And I've been trying to figure out if there's something in the language that I'm using. Is my computer working? What is preventing the information from getting across? And thankfully, slowly, it's been changing. It has been an incredibly frustrating 18 months, because the information that I have now compiled is just so alarming and so catastrophic in terms of its impact on the population of this country, that it's so bad, so difficult to absorb, that no one wants to know about it. It's like dealing with an addict. They just don't want to know about it. And of course, they'll just continue with it for as long as possible until somebody, literally, in the literal sense, puts a gun to their head and says, stop it. Because they're actually poisoning the population of this country. And I don't say that lightly, because this is a book by Dr. Hans Molenberg, and he was the medical physician and a cancer specialist and oncologist in the Netherlands who stopped water fluoridation there. And he set up a team of 12 medical physicians, and that's exactly what he says in it, that water fluoridation is low-level poisoning of the population. And they're doing it at a level, not obviously you can say not deliberately, but it's at a level that's low enough that you don't realise you're being poisoned. But it will vary from one person to the next. And it really is shocking. And I'm going to show you tonight how shocking it is. And I'm showing this data to a public group because you'll have seen it. and I've shown it in the last 48 hours to my network internationally, and they are absolutely astonished by the data. And I knew about it before, but to actually compile it into just one or two graphs to show people and have the backup information behind it with all the references has really taken a lot of concentration and a lot of time. So I'm going to run through some of them, which you hear. These are just a series of slides. I had this one because it's an old Chinese proverb, and it's true as ever. When you drink water, remember the source.